Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get started. Give me 1 second here. All right, how was that? Can you see?
Yes, we can see. It's great.
Good. All right. So again, thank you for allowing me to be here and present to you. The International Criminology Conference is my first opportunity to speak at this conference, and I hope I'll be invited back for many more. I have stepped into some of the sessions throughout the day, and I've enjoyed the presenters and the topics. This one will be possibly a little bit different. We're going to start broad with Mexican transnational criminal organizations, or Mexican cartels, little shorter title. And then we're going to dive into some counterfeit drug trends and see how that they're influenced by the Mexican cartels. Again, I'm Michael Clark. I'm a second-year doctoral student at APUS, and that is something that I'm excited about. It's something that I think is it's very important. It's been very beneficial to me. It's a lot of work, but also very rewarding. My other full-time job is I'm an intelligence analyst for the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. I'm also a 21-year Air Force veteran. I retired after a long and fulfilling career, and I enjoy continuing my service. So a bit of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to have an overview of the Mexican drug cartels and their trafficking enterprise. We're going to look at how the COVID-19 sort of forced them to change their business model, and they pivoted to merge violence and benevolence into a working enterprise for their benefit. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Then we'll talk about how the cartels and their trafficking of the counterfeit drugs is being called a threat to national security. We'll move into those dangerous counterfeit drugs and then talk about the national fatal drug overdose trends, which continue to climb and break and set new records. Lastly, we'll look at the outlook and ways that the U.S. government, law enforcement, and even the civil organizations that deal with illicit drug abuse, that deal with overdose and addiction, how that they're combating this counterfeit pill epidemic. So first, I want to dive right into the Mexican drug cartels. As you can see, there are 9 prevalent. There are other smaller factions, but there are 9 prevalent drug cartels that the U.S. government, law enforcement, the Drug Enforcement Administration have classified as transnational criminal organizations. Now, if you notice the top 2, Sinaloa and CJNG for short, those are highlighted, and we're going to spend most of our time talking about these 2 cartels because they hold the most expansive and the most prevalent footprint for drug trafficking corridors and their introduction into the U.S. across the U.S. southwest border. So we look at this pullout here, this map, and it talks about not only the territories that the different cartels that they control, but also, if you notice, these are also conflict zones. So the cartels obviously are built on their money and power model, business model. But whenever they have an issuance where they have a rival faction, a rival cartel, or even when the Mexican government, law enforcement, or military they see them as a threat to their business, to their thriving funds management, then they'll go to war with them. One of the things that we have seen lately within the last, say, 3 years is a partnership of the larger cartels with some of the smaller factions. A lot of that is due to some of the restrictions placed on border freedom, border crossing because of the pandemic. But other reasons that we've found is that they enjoy that modified or more flexible business model because everyone shares in the profits. Drug prices go up, prices for staff and for trafficking go down, so that there's greater profit on the back end to the cartels and for those that they work with. So there's a group called Global Guardian. It's a private security company, but they also employ strategic analysts within their group. And so they do these threat assessments. This is the most recent 2023 outlook risk map for cartel wars. As you can see, the areas that they have forecast to be the risk areas for security and volatile operations in northern Mexico are some of the same areas that were on the previous map that are controlled by the cartels and their rival factions. So again, it's not a surprise that the cartels moving into more of a land management and a trafficking management role, that they would be at odds with their competitors. And when you're talking drug trafficking, when you're talking transnational criminal organizations, when you're talking cartels, that business model, when it's threatened, they respond with violence. So it's only not the influence of the cartels is not just limited to Mexico. This is a map from, it's sourced from the DEA, and I can tell you later how to get that. This is open source information from the DEA website through the National Drug Threat Assessment, the annual report. So these are reported influences that the different cartels and the factions have within the United States. A lot of these are cooperated with criminal gangs and criminal organizations that are domestic to the United States. But the influence is not only domestic, but it is cross-border, international. So now we move into talking a little bit about how the cartels adapted and they pivoted their business model due to COVID. So we saw not only domestically, but overseas, it was a global pandemic, and it affected not only people's health and safety, but it also affected the trafficking of goods and services. And on the illicit side of illicit trafficking, it affected their freedom of movement, cost, and supply chain as well. So one of the things that we saw due to the COVID restrictions at the border and the lack of supplies being shipped transnationally is that the cartel, specifically CJ&G and Sinaloa, that they looked at their business model and they said that we need to adapt our business model, not only because of the shortage of supply, but also we want to continue to build our funds. We want that that corridor of drug trafficking to be more robust. So what they did was they attacked the problem twofold. First, they partnered with other cartels and other factions, even other criminal organizations like the Coyotes, those that handle the human trafficking, and other government and non-government entities that are either by corruption or they're just heavily influenced by the strength and power of the cartel. They partnered with them to open up new lines of trafficking corridors. Some of these were by land, some were by sea, some were even by air. We saw an increase in technology as well, using social media outlets for advertising and for connections. We also saw the use of drones very heavily by the cartels. It wasn't the COVID-19 wasn't the first time that they had used this technology. However, we saw a much more robust increase in the use of drones, third-party apps, communication apps, pay apps, those kind of things more into the cyber realm than we had previous to the COVID-19 pandemic. The other way that the cartels pivoted, again, specifically Sinaloa and CJ&G, is that they opened their own, similar to a Red Cross. They began using nonprofit organizations to produce and distribute care packages, COVID relief supplies to villages and those that were less fortunate, those that had a high impact of COVID pandemic, lack of medicine, lack of transportation, lack of food, and just toiletries, normal daily supplies was very, very difficult to get. And food and water was very scarce. So what the cartels did, Sinaloa had a nonprofit called El Chapo 701. It was actually started by El Chapo's daughter. And it's a legitimate 501 business. It was actually listed in 2009 on the Forbes listing of most important or powerful businesses, recognized to have assets over $1 million. But they use this type of entrepreneurship to deliver goods and services in truckloads to the poor and destitute villages in and around the areas in northern Mexico where they control. Likewise, CJ&G, they used social media as an outlet to provide advertising for their benevolence, and the goods and services showed up in truckloads in some of these smaller, more destitute villages. They use that as a public relations tool. They also use that as a way to engender the loyalty and the trust rather than fear from the local populace. Now, they still dealt in violence and they still dealt in fear. And we believe that this violence married to benevolence sort of business model that the cartels enjoyed during the pandemic, it did a couple of different things. Some of the rationale behind it was that instead of force to gain the loyalty and gain the support from the local populace, they used benevolence. The other thing we think that they did was they undercut or undermined the legitimate Mexican government's relief efforts, so that instead of turning toward the government for their relief and for their supplies and pandemic relief, they turned to the cartels because they were there, they were present. There was no red tape, there was no jurisdictional boundaries, there was no haggling of who got what. There was plenty of supplies in all forms, food, water, toiletries, for everyone. So now they did this while at the same time distracting everyone from their campaign of violence that they continued to serve, not only on the Mexican government, but on other cartels and other factions that were in the same business that they were, but they were encroaching on their profits. So on one hand, they're handing out benevolent supplies as COVID relief. On the other hand, they're still utilizing the age-old intimidation and violence tactics that they had been doing for decades. Now, why is this important to us? Why are we so concerned here in the United States or along the border? Why are we so concerned with the echelon of power and influence that the cartels wield? It's because of this. The US Congress during the 2019 session said that the drug overdose crisis is a clear and present public safety, public health hazard and a threat to national security. The administrator of the DEA in the beginning of 2022 said that fentanyl is the single deadliest drug that our nation has ever encountered. Now, the reason it's important to study the cartels, the reason it's important to learn their strategy, their business strategy, and their strategy for drug trafficking in and importation of these deadly drugs is because they are the main supplier of fentanyl and counterfeit pills into the country. That fentanyl and those counterfeit pills are being introduced into our nation, into our communities at a record-setting level. And they are a direct result of the direct cause of the resulting drug overdose deaths that we have seen over the last several years. There's also a national economic impact. You can see the numbers here. Over $193 billion were used for the efforts to combat illicit drug use. Now that number went to HHS, and more will go to it in the 2023 budget, but that was sent out not only for the drug control program, but for addiction identification, education, treatment, and recovery. So there is a solid plan that the administration and that the National Drug Control Program administrators have to combat addiction. But as we'll see in later slides, it's not enough. There is no shortage of demand for illicit drugs. And as we see, as more and more potent and powerful drugs are introduced into the market, we will see that the US government, the US law enforcement, Department of Justice, even the DEA is struggling to find new and inventive ways to curb the introduction and the trafficking of these deadly drugs like fentanyl, like counterfeit drugs, into the communities, into the US markets. So in 2021, DEA reported that they seized enough fentanyl to kill every American in the United States. So DEA, CBP, other federal partners, we were able to seize so much fentanyl that if you were to break it apart and give a dose meter to based on the US population, it would have been enough to kill every American. But this is hypothetical. We're talking hypotheticals, right? Obviously not every person in the country has access or has ingested fentanyl. So this is a hypothetical issuance, right? Well, the reality is that according to the CDC and the Department of Justice, over 107,000 people died last year due to drug overdose. Now that's in all forms. That's in all forms from what you would consider traditional drugs, accidental poisonings, and also ingestion of the illicit drugs, counterfeit drugs, such as oxycodone M30s and the counterfeit drugs that have fentanyl that are infused in them. So 107,000 people died. That's 295 a day. That is commercial airliner. If a commercial airliner fell out of the sky every day for a year, there would be a national conversation about the safety of air traffic in the United States. Roughly 12 people every hour died from a drug overdose last year. So one of the things that I encourage you to consider is that these numbers continue to rise. every year, we have a higher and higher record-setting number of Americans that are dying from drug overdoses. And it is true that there are a myriad of identifiers that CDC and other reporting agencies use to classify what is a drug and how those victims die from drug overdoses. However, if you look at this chart for 2021, 67% of those 107,000 that died from drug overdose involve fentanyl. Now, fentanyl can be infused in the counterfeit pills, which I will focus for a majority of my time today, but it also can be introduced into more traditional drugs like cocaine, like heroin, like other opiates, or even like methamphetamines. Why is this important? The first quarter of this year, DEA reported that we were experiencing nationwide mass overdose events. So a mass overdose event is 4 or more people in the same location or in a relative close proximity that have overdosed at the same time. So if we look at these numbers, between January and March, 58 people overdosed and 29 of those died. The majority of these were reported through law enforcement and through local health organizations that they thought they were taking more traditional illicit drugs like cocaine, like oxycodone pills, like methamphetamine, but they were all tainted or infused with fentanyl. Fentanyl is, it's a drug that can be powdered. It can be mixed into a pill. It can be mixed into more traditional drugs as an infusion, as an additive. It can also be liquefied and used as a injection, right? So we've seen this is just one snapshot over a 3-month period beginning of this year. And if you remember the previous slide where the numbers of drug overdose deaths have continued to rise every year, this time next year, we don't know how many drug overdose events, mass overdose events that we're going to find. But unfortunately, my fear is that they are going to continue to be a problem. They are going to continue to increase. So late in 2021, DEA initiated the One Pill Can Kill campaign. The One Pill Can Kill campaign focuses on the counterfeit drug trends, and specifically the little pills that mimic legitimate pharmaceutical pills, the M30s, oxycodone M30s. They're bluish or greenish, and lab testing across the country have found that 4 of every 10 counterfeit pills contain a lethal amount of fentanyl. If you see in the slide here, these multicolored pills, they call them rainbow pills or Skittles. Those are the newest evolution of these. Every single one of them has been manufactured somewhere on the border or south of the border, and they've been trafficked across, mainly by Sinaloa. And the main purpose is to introduce a signature drug, because the market is flooded with the little blue pills. Some people call them blue, some people call them M30s. There are a myriad of names for the counterfeit M30s. But the thing to remember is that there's millions of those that are seized. If you look at the inset here, the Attorney General in a news release in September said that there was more than 10.2 million fentanyl pills and approximately 980 pounds of powdered fentanyl that had been seized from May to September of this year. So we're not even talking about a lengthy historical record. We're talking about within the last few months that there's been this much fentanyl that is seized. And unfortunately, folks, we don't catch it all. Reporting has shown that as part of their strategy to lessen the possibility of law enforcement interdiction that the cartels have been using more couriers and smaller shipments so that the likelihood of all of their product getting seized will be lessened. So they're coming across in great numbers, but with more mules or couriers through more avenues of approach, both at border crossings and illicitly through the utilization of the human traffickers, and many other ways that we're still just now trying to catch up to and figure out. So fentanyl, how does fentanyl get to Mexico and how does fentanyl get into the United States? Well, it all begins with China. China has the precursors. China has the analogs of fentanyl where they manufacture it and then they ship it to either India for further processing, or they ship it directly to Mexico so that it can be infused in other drugs. It can be sent across in cake bricks where it's powder formed, or it will be pressed into the counterfeit pills, the little blue oxycodones, or even now the multicolor rainbow M30s. And then it's smuggled across the border where it's then by associates of CJ&G and Sinaloa, then it's trafficked throughout the United States through couriers. Why is fentanyl so deadly? Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. It's 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. Morphine is sort of the benchmark for pain relievers, for opioids, as to how powerful it is. 2 milligrams, which is the picture there with the pencil, and then again with the penny. 2 milligrams of fentanyl is a lethal dose to an adult human. So the problem with these counterfeit pills, and I'll show you some of those that we've seized just through DEA in the Indianapolis area of responsibility. The problem with these pills is that since they are manufactured without licensing, controls, and without a quality control program, that's why you have 4 in 10 pills that are lethal and the others aren't. We've had individuals that have overdosed that have been part of a group that have taken the same product bought from the same dealer or from similar dealers, and some of them have little to no effect whatsoever. Some of them pass out and are revived, and others, even though they are hit with Narcan, they are not revived. They pass away because fentanyl affects the respiratory system and basically tells your body to shut down. So that's why it's so dangerous. That's why it's so deadly. And that's why it's so cheap and easy for cartels and illicit criminal organizations to infuse and mix this into their products as they distribute throughout the country. We found that oxycodone, Adderall, and Xanax are some of the most popular pills that are counterfeited to mimic legitimate pills that are sold through a physician. These are some of the ones that have been seized. The pill press on the right, you can still see some of the blue powder that was found on it when it was seized by DEA agents. In the middle, the blue pills, they come just like that. They're boxed up, or they're wrapped up, or they're hidden within a vehicle, within a person's bag. Any method that they can use to secret those pills not only into the country, but then into communities and neighborhoods and even schools. A lot of the targeting now is for newer users at raves and parties or in the schools, high school and middle school. Novel ways that they tempt newer users to use these pills. Some of the trafficking methods that we've uncovered, bundles hidden that were seized from human traffickers, rental cars, vehicles where they cut out or modify the seat or a different type of the vehicle called a trap. where they will modify the vehicle or a trailer, another type of device. They will hide the drugs in. Very, very difficult to find, even for seasoned law enforcement professionals. On the right, that's a portable air compressor. They are modified in bulk and then shipped out, hidden in plain sight in work vehicles, on job sites. They cross the border with the pills inside. They're trafficked to whatever the location for distribution is, and then they come back with cash. It's cash for pills, cash for product, and it's very lucrative, and it happens every day in the United States. Hidden fentanyl, 14 kilos of fentanyl and 1 kilo of heroin from the West Coast to the East Coast, hidden in plain sight in a speaker box. Now, for the local dealers, those that deal in 100, anywhere from 1 or 2 pills all the way to maybe 100, 200, even 1,000 pills. A lot of the communication has been through third-party apps, through communication apps, through your financial transaction apps, and I have some examples of those. But they communicate using emojis. It's not just for the young crowd, but it's very familiar to those middle school, high school, even young adults. It's very possible, and we have seen instances where a buyer will identify a dealer or vice versa. They will identify a product, request a product, get a meet location, negotiate a price, all over either third-party apps, social media, or through standard text, SMS text, using all emojis, no words whatsoever. And through third-party peer-to-peer encryption, the anonymity nowadays is very, very difficult to find those users. Even if you can find a dealer, you can't always identify the person purchasing. If you have an idea of who the purchaser is, or for example, if we're doing a investigation on someone that has been a victim of a drug overdose death, even if we can identify the time and place where they purchased that drug, it's very, very difficult sometimes to identify the person who supplied them with that drug. Third-party apps for pay apps, as I said, Venmo, Cash App, very prevalent, very, very easy to use. And then with the anonymity, as I said before, difficult for law enforcement to investigate. So a lot of the information that I spoke about today comes directly from the DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment. You can find more information not only about the transnational criminal organizations, the cartels, Sinaloa, CJ&G, other criminal organizations that they partner with or that they are embattled with over territory or over funding. But you can also learn about different types of drugs, counterfeit drugs, their effects and influence on the community, and some of the steps that DEA, the Department of Justice, and the U.S. government law enforcement officials are employing to try and combat this threat to national security. That's been my time. This is me. My contact information is there. I welcome any questions. For further information, I refer you to the connections there on this slide. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. All right, there we go. You're back?
Yes. So unfortunately, we will not have the second speaker, Anna Chavez. She's having health issues. So,
Oh, I'm sorry.
So we are open to questions. Please type your questions in chat or in Q&A, and Michael will be able to answer them.
I will try.
I think we have something. Oh no, that's not a question.
No one's throwing anything, so that's good.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. Okay, we have. Do you plan to pursue this research in the future? And if so, what angle would you take?
Yes, I do actually. So I've written a couple of papers on this topic, not only from the strategic standpoint of the introduction of novel and more potent drugs into the American communities and into domestic illicit drug markets, but also on the other more strategic views on the international connections and how that in some ways it seems that we are behind the curve and unable to set enough, to put enough influence out in the international and the global market to stop the precursor chemicals and the analogs of fentanyl. See, fentanyl is it's a Schedule II, and even internationally, there is pressure on China and other countries to not ship that uncontrolled and so widely as it is. However, because it's a synthetic opioid, which somebody can make in their basement, right? It's, you don't have to cultivate it, you don't have to grow it, you don't have to employ people with doctorate degrees or chemists. You can make it fairly cheap, which is why the cartels love it. But it's just a chemical. So tweaking that chemical a little bit to an analog or to a precursor, it has the same physiological effects on the body as the fentanyl or as any other opioid does, but it's not controlled. So you can ship it in the mail, you can receive it in the mail, and unfortunately, because it's not controlled, it's not covered by the Controlled Substances Act, it's not illegal. As long as someone doesn't use it for nefarious purposes, they don't sell it, they don't try to market it. It's one of those challenges, uphill challenges that law enforcement has.
Thank you, Michael. We have more questions. Is there a globalization of fentanyl trafficking from Sinaloa? Oh, what is that? Sinaloa? Or to Europe?
Well, we know that some of the analogs have been found in Europe, specifically in the UK. Their version, our partners that are the DEA there that have the same function, they have identified it. But Mexico, the Sinaloa cartel seem to be really focused on the U.S. market. Not that it hasn't gone other places, but we've had some reporting in Canada as well. But the North American market has been very good for business for the illicit counterfeit pill market from Sinaloa.
Thank you. More questions? Please type them in Q&A or in chat. We have some time.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, I understand.
Oh, we'll wait like 1 more minute, and if nobody has
Okay.
questions, we will end the session. So if you have questions, oh, we have a question here. How do cybercurrency will play a future role in money transfer?
So that's a great question. So e-currency, cryptocurrency is a big market. We used to see it mostly with the dark web sales of illicit drugs, because you can buy anything through dark web markets, right? And it's used almost exclusively when shopping the dark web. However, we've also seen it in other street level dealers transactions who traditionally have always used cash or they trade drugs for drugs, right? Well, now we have found that some will accept Cash Apps through Cash App or through Bitcoin or other type of cryptocurrency. They'll accept payments that way. And because of the blockchain, because of the anonymity, it is very easy to launder those coins, to launder that currency, just as it is with the hard currency that the cartels love to get.
Thank you. More questions? Thank you, Francis. Yes, thank you guys for all the questions. Those were great. If you have more, please type them. We'll wait one more minute, and then if you don't have any questions, we'll end the session. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I see some people are leaving.
All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate your monitoring, your efforts.
Yes, thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. Thank you. So we are going to end this session now. We are not going to have the second speaker due to her health issues. And thank you everyone for attending. And thank you, Michael, for a wonderful presentation. Bye-bye.
I appreciate it. Thank you.